Poor girl, accused by a billionaire, went to court without a lawyer, until her twin siblings appeared and revealed the whole truth, making everyone cry. Before we dive in, give it a like and share where you're from and one thing you're grateful for today. The heavy oak doors of the downtown courthouse burst open with a thunderous crash that echoed through the marble hallways like a gunshot. 7-year-old Emma Wilson stumbled through the entrance, her tiny frame dwarfed by the towering pillars and intimidating architecture surrounding her. Her worn sneakers, held together with electrical tape where the sole had begun to separate, squeaked against the polished floor as she clutched a crumpled piece of paper, the court summons that had arrived 3 days ago, changing everything in their small world. The courthouse lobby buzzed with activity that felt overwhelming to Emma's young senses. Lawyers in expensive suits rushed past carrying thick briefcases, their shoes clicking authoritatively against the marble. Court officers stood at metal detectors, their stern faces scanning everyone who entered. Families huddled together on wooden benches, whispering anxiously about their cases. The air smelled of cleaning supplies and fear, a combination that made Emma's stomach churn with anxiety. "Mummy, I'm scared," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the bustling crowd. Her small hand gripped the court papers so tightly that her knuckles had turned white, and tears threatened to spill from her wide blue eyes. Sarah Wilson knelt down beside her daughter, her own hands trembling as she smoothed Emma's tangled blonde hair. At 28, Sarah looked far older than her years. Deep circles shadowed her eyes from working double shifts, and her uniform from the downtown office building where she worked as a night janitor still carried the faint smell of industrial cleaning supplies. Her fingers were rough and cracked from constant exposure to harsh chemicals, but they were gentle as they touched her daughter's face. "I know, sweetheart, but we have to be brave today. You didn't do anything wrong, and everyone will see that." Sarah's voice cracked slightly as she spoke, betraying her own terror about what lay ahead. She'd spent the last 3 days researching legal procedures at the public library, trying to understand a system that seemed designed to intimidate people like them. The charges were devastating. Theft of a diamond necklace worth $50,000 from the penthouse office of Harrison Blake, one of the city's most powerful billionaires. The accusation had come out of nowhere like a lightning bolt, shattering their already fragile world. Emma had been cleaning alongside her mother that Thursday evening, September 15th, when Blake claimed his prized family heirloom had disappeared from his locked desk drawer. Security footage showed only Sarah and Emma entering and leaving the 40-story Blake Industries building that night. The recording was grainy, but clear enough to identify them walking through the marble lobby at 8:47 p.m. and exiting at 11:23 p.m. Blake's word against a 7-year-old girl's innocence. No lawyer would take their case pro bono, not against someone with Blake's influence and unlimited resources. "Mrs. Wilson?" A stern bailiff approached them, his voice cutting through Emma's racing thoughts. His uniform was crisp and intimidating, and his badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "The judge is ready to see you now. Courtroom 3B, 3rd floor." Emma's small hand gripped her mother's fingers so tightly that Sarah winced. They walked toward the elevator, passing other families who looked just as lost and frightened. But none of them were as young as Emma, none facing accusations that could destroy a child's future before it had truly begun. In the elevator, Emma pressed her face against her mother's side, trying to make herself invisible. The courtroom doors loomed ahead like the entrance to a nightmare. Through the small windows, Emma could see rows of wooden benches and a raised platform where the judge would sit. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it echoing in the quiet hallway. What she didn't know was that someone was watching from the shadows near the courthouse steps, someone who held the key to everything that was about to unfold. Two small figures had just escaped from their daycare 3 blocks away, following an instinct they couldn't explain, but somehow understood was desperately important. As they reached for the courtroom door handle, Emma felt the world spinning around her like a carousel gone too fast. This was just the beginning of the most important day of her young life, and she had no idea that the truth was about to emerge from the most unexpected source imaginable. Judge Margaret Foster had presided over juvenile cases for 15 years, but something about this particular hearing made her stomach churn with unease. As she reviewed the case file one final time in her chambers, she couldn't shake the feeling that crucial pieces of the puzzle were missing. The evidence seemed almost too neat, too convenient, and her experienced instincts were sending up red flags. The case file contained stark black and white photographs of Blake's office, detailed security reports, and witness statements that painted a damning picture. But Foster had learned to look beyond the surface, especially when children were involved. Something about this situation felt orchestrated, though she couldn't yet put her finger on what exactly was wrong. Emma sat in the defendant's chair, her legs dangling several inches from the floor. The oversized wooden seat made her look even smaller and more vulnerable than her 7 years already suggested. She wore her only good dress, a faded blue sundress that Sarah had bought from a thrift store 2 summers ago when Emma was 5. The dress was now slightly too small, the hem hitting just above her knees instead of mid-calf, but it was still the nicest thing Emma owned. Her blonde hair had been carefully braided by her mother that morning, though strands were already coming loose from her nervous fidgeting. Emma's blue eyes darted around the courtroom, taking in the American flag hanging beside the judge's bench, the wooden jury box that stood empty for this hearing, and the gallery filled with strangers who had come to watch her fate being decided. Across the aisle, Harrison Blake commanded attention without saying a word. At 62, he possessed the kind of presence that came with decades of building a business empire worth $3 billion. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His charcoal Armani suit probably cost more than Sarah made in 6 months, and his cold grey eyes never wavered as they fixed on Emma with unmistakable disdain and disgust. Blake's jaw was set in a hard line, and his hands gripped the armrests of his chair with barely controlled anger. To him, this little girl represented everything wrong with society, people who took what didn't belong to them, who couldn't appreciate the sanctity of private property. He had built his fortune through discipline and hard work, and he had no patience for thieves, regardless of their age. "Your Honor," Blake's attorney, Richard Carrington, stood with practiced confidence. At 55, Carrington was one of the city's most feared prosecutors, known for his ruthless tactics and impressive conviction rate. His voice carried the authority of someone who had never lost a case involving theft charges. "My client's family heirloom, a diamond necklace passed down through 4 generations, disappeared during the night of September 15th. Security records show only Mrs. Wilson and her daughter had access to Mr. Blake's private office during the relevant time frame. The necklace was valued at $50,000 and carries irreplaceable sentimental value." Emma's lower lip trembled as she listened to words she barely understood, but knew were bad. The numbers meant nothing to her. 50,000 might as well have been 50 million. She had never owned anything worth more than the $20 doll her mother had saved for months to buy her last Christmas. She looked up at her mother, who sat in the front row behind her. Sarah's face was pale and drawn with exhaustion from working double shifts to pay for this court appearance. She had cleaned office buildings from midnight to 8 a.m., then worked at a grocery store from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. for the past week, desperately trying to scrape together money for legal help that never materialized. "The defendant," Carrington continued, gesturing dismissively toward Emma as if she were an object rather than a child, "was left unsupervised in the office while Mrs. Wilson cleaned the adjacent conference room. Children this age are naturally attracted to shiny objects, and unfortunately, sometimes their underdeveloped moral compass leads them to take things that don't belong to them. "I didn't take anything." Emma's small voice suddenly pierced the courtroom silence, startling everyone present. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she stood up in her chair, her tiny fists clenched with frustration and fear. "I don't even know what a necklace is. I was coloring the whole time." Her pronunciation of necklace as necklace only emphasized her innocence and youth, but it also made her seem even more vulnerable in the formal courtroom setting. Several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the tragedy of a child being subjected to such proceedings. Judge Foster leaned forward, her expression softening slightly as she looked at Emma. "Emma, honey, you need to sit down and let the grown-ups talk first, okay? You'll have a chance to tell your side of the story soon." But Harrison Blake had heard enough. He rose from his seat like an avenging angel, his face flushed with indignation and barely controlled rage. His voice boomed through the courtroom with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Your Honor, this child has cost me not just a priceless family treasure, but also significant emotional distress. That necklace belonged to my late wife, Margaret. She wore it on our wedding day to every anniversary dinner, and it was the last thing she asked to hold before she passed away 2 years ago. It's irreplaceable, and this little thief has probably already sold it for candy money." The mention of his deceased wife sent a murmur through the courtroom gallery. Blake's voice cracked slightly when he spoke Margaret's name, revealing the first crack in his otherwise steely composure. Emma's eyes went wide with confusion and fear at being called a thief. She had never even seen a necklace in Mr. Blake's office. She'd spent the entire evening in the small break room, coloring in her activity book while her mother worked. What none of them knew was that at that very moment, 2 small figures were making their way through the courthouse's maze-like corridors, following voices and instincts they couldn't fully explain, but somehow understood were desperately important. The truth was about to arrive in the most unexpected form imaginable. 2 floors below the courtroom, Jake and Luke Wilson waddled through the courthouse's basement level with the determined purpose that only 2-year-olds could muster when they knew something important was happening to someone they loved. The twins had escaped from Sunshine Daycare 3 blocks away 25 minutes ago, somehow knowing that their big sister needed them desperately, even though they couldn't yet fully express why or how they understood this urgent truth. The basement corridors were dimly lit and confusing, filled with storage rooms, maintenance equipment, and offices for court clerks. But the twins moved with surprising certainty, their matching blonde curls bouncing as they held hands and navigated the maze-like passages. Their identical bright blue eyes, so much like Emma's, seemed to shine with an inner knowledge that defied their limited vocabulary and young age. Mrs. Patterson from Sunshine Daycare had discovered their absence during afternoon snack time and was frantically calling Sarah's emergency contacts, but Sarah's phone was turned off for the court hearing. The daycare director had already called the police and was organizing search teams, terrified that something terrible had happened to the 2-year-old twins under her care. The escape itself had been almost supernatural in its timing and execution. The twins had been playing quietly in the sandbox when Luke suddenly stood up and pointed toward downtown. "Emma," he had said clearly, one of the few words in their limited vocabulary that everyone could understand perfectly. Jake had immediately joined his brother, and together they had squeezed through a gap in the daycare's chain-link fence that was barely wide enough for their small bodies. They had walked 3 city blocks, crossing busy streets with an inexplicable sense of safety and direction that defied explanation. "Emma," Jake said to his brother as they climbed a flight of concrete stairs, their small voices echoing in the empty stairwell. "Emma sad," Luke nodded solemnly, clutching something tightly in his small fist, something that glittered faintly in the fluorescent lighting. Meanwhile, back in courtroom 3B, the proceedings had taken an increasingly harsh turn. Blake's attorney was now presenting enlarged photographs of the alleged crime scene, pointing to Emma's fingerprints on various surfaces throughout the office with the precision of a forensic expert. As you can see, Your Honor, the defendant's prints are clearly visible on Mr. Blake's desk drawer, the exact location where the necklace was stored in a locked compartment. This clearly indicates both intent and opportunity. The child knew exactly where to look. Emma shrank further into her oversized chair, feeling smaller and more scared with each word. She remembered touching the drawer, but only because she had dropped her favorite purple crayon and it had rolled underneath the massive oak desk. She had crawled down to retrieve it and accidentally bumped the drawer with her elbow while trying to squeeze into the narrow space. But in this intimidating room, full of adults using big words she didn't understand, she felt too scared and confused to speak up in her own defense. Sarah watched helplessly from the gallery, her heart breaking as she saw her daughter being systematically destroyed by the legal system. Without legal representation, she felt completely powerless to protect Emma from these accusations. The system seemed designed to crush families like theirs, working poor, invisible, expendable. She had tried to find a lawyer who would work pro bono, but Blake's reputation and wealth had scared everyone away. Judge Foster studied Emma carefully, her maternal instincts warring with her judicial responsibilities. Something about this entire case felt wrong to her experienced eye. Mr. Blake, I need to ask you directly. Are you absolutely certain the necklace was in that drawer on the night in question? Could there be any possibility that you misplaced it earlier? Blake's jaw tightened, and his grey eyes flashed with insulted pride. Your Honor, I placed it there myself that afternoon at exactly 5:30 p.m., as I have every single day for the past 2 years since Margaret's death. It's part of my daily routine. I look at Margaret's photograph and hold her necklace for a few moments before ending my workday. It's how I feel, connected to her memory, how I honor her legacy. His voice carried the weight of genuine grief, but also an inflexibility that suggested he had never considered any possibility other than theft. The courtroom fell silent except for the sound of Emma's quiet sniffling and the hum of the air conditioning system. But that heavy silence was about to be shattered in a way no one could have predicted. A soft, thudding sound came from the courtroom doors, small fists pounding against heavy wood with desperate urgency. Then, clear as church bells on a Sunday morning, 2 tiny voices called out in perfect unison, "Emma! Emma! Emma!" Every head in the courtroom turned toward the entrance as the bailiff approached the doors, confusion evident on his weathered face. What he was about to discover would change everything they thought they knew about this case and challenge every assumption they had made about guilt, innocence, and the mysterious ways that truth sometimes reveals itself. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors with practiced efficiency, expecting to find lost tourists or confused citizens seeking directions. Instead, he discovered Jake and Luke Wilson standing in the hallway, their faces streaked with tears of frustration, but their expressions filled with a determination that seemed impossible for children so young. The twins looked impossibly small in the vast courthouse corridor, their matching denim overalls slightly dirty from their adventure through the city streets and basement tunnels, but their presence commanded immediate attention from everyone in the packed courtroom. "Emma!" Jake called out again, his voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. Both boys toddled toward their sister with outstretched arms, their small legs moving as fast as they could manage. Their blonde curls bounced with each step, and their bright blue eyes were fixed on Emma with laser-like focus. "Oh my God!" Sarah gasped, jumping up from her seat so quickly that she knocked her purse to the floor, its contents scattering across the marble tiles. "How did they get here? They should be at daycare. Jake, Luke." Her voice carried a mixture of relief at seeing them safe and terror at the implications of their presence. If they had escaped from daycare and wandered through the city alone, anything could have happened to them. The courthouse was miles from Sunshine Daycare, across busy intersections and through neighborhoods that weren't always safe for adults, let alone toddlers. Judge Foster banged her gavel gently, her years of experience telling her that something extraordinary was happening. "Bailiff, please bring those children here safely. This is highly unusual, but they're clearly connected to this case. Security, please check the hallways to make sure no one else is missing or lost." Emma's face transformed completely as her little brothers approached. The fear and despair that had shadowed her features all morning melted away, replaced by joy and relief. Despite everything happening around her, the accusations, the formal proceedings, the intimidating adults, seeing Jake and Luke made her feel less alone and frightened. She climbed down from her chair and knelt to hug them both, her small arms barely able to encompass both twins at once. "I missed you so much," she whispered into their hair, breathing in their familiar scent of baby shampoo and the graham crackers they had eaten for snack time. "How did you find me?" "Why are they here?" Blake demanded, his composure slipping for the first time since entering the courtroom. His perfectly styled silver hair was slightly disheveled from running his hands through it, and his expensive suit jacket had wrinkled from his tense posture. "Your Honor, this is turning into a complete circus. I demand that we maintain some semblance of order and professionalism. These children have no business in a legal proceeding." "What you'll demand," Judge Foster interrupted firmly, her voice carrying the full weight of her judicial authority, "is nothing at this moment, Mr. Blake. Something extraordinary is happening here, and as the presiding judge, I want to understand exactly what it is before we proceed further." Luke, still clinging to something in his tiny fist, looked up at Emma with wide, serious eyes that seemed to hold wisdom far beyond his 2 years. "Emma, no bad," he declared with the crystal clarity that sometimes emerged from his usual toddler babble, his words ringing through the courtroom like a proclamation. Jake nodded vigorously in agreement, his curls bouncing with the motion. "Emma, good girl. Emma, no take shiny things. Emma, color pictures." The courtroom erupted in surprised murmurs and whispered conversations. How could these 2-year-olds possibly know about the specific accusations against their sister? They had been at daycare when the alleged theft occurred the previous Thursday, and surely Sarah wouldn't have discussed such complex legal matters with toddlers who could barely form complete sentences. Carrington, Blake's high-powered attorney, looked visibly annoyed by this unexpected development. His carefully orchestrated case presentation was being derailed by children who couldn't even tie their own shoes. "Your Honor, these children are clearly too young to provide any meaningful testimony. This is just an emotional distraction designed to garner sympathy for the defendant. I object to this theatrical display." But Judge Foster held up her hand for silence, her rings catching the courtroom's fluorescent lighting. In her 15 years on the bench, she had learned to trust her instincts about children, and every fiber of her being was telling her that something profoundly important was happening. These twins hadn't just wandered into her courtroom by accident. They were here for a reason that went beyond simple coincidence. "Luke," she said gently, approaching the little boy with the careful movements of someone experienced with frightened children. "What do you have in your hand, sweetheart? Can you show the nice judge?" The 2-year-old looked uncertain, his bright blue eyes darting between his beloved sister and the imposing figure of the judge in her black robes. The courtroom held its collective breath, sensing that whatever Luke was clutching might change everything about this case. Emma squeezed his shoulder encouragingly, her 7-year-old wisdom telling her that whatever her little brother had found was important. "Show the nice lady, Luke," she whispered softly. "It's okay. She wants to help us." Slowly, with the deliberate movements of a child making a momentous decision, Luke opened his small fist to reveal something that made Harrison Blake's face drain of all color. There, nestled in the toddler's palm, like a captured piece of starlight, was a glittering diamond necklace, the very necklace that had started this entire nightmare and brought them all to this moment of revelation. The courtroom fell into stunned silence, so complete that the only sounds were the hum of the air conditioning and Blake's sharp intake of breath. He stared at the jewelry as if he were seeing a ghost, while Sarah's mouth fell open in complete shock. But it was Emma's reaction that proved most telling to Judge Foster's experienced eye. The little girl looked just as surprised and confused as everyone else in the room. "Where did you get that, Luke?" Judge Foster asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might somehow make this miraculous moment disappear. But before Luke could answer in his limited vocabulary, Harrison Blake suddenly stood up, his entire body trembling like a man who had just witnessed something impossible. "That's not possible," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "That necklace, it can't be here. It can't be." Harrison Blake's legs gave out completely, and he collapsed back into his leather chair as if someone had cut his puppet strings. The powerful billionaire who had commanded the courtroom just moments earlier with his accusations and righteous indignation now looked like a broken old man confronting something that challenged everything he thought he understood about reality. His face had gone from its usual commanding presence to a sickly grey colour, and his hands shook uncontrollably as he stared at the necklace in Luke's tiny palm. "Margaret," he whispered, so quietly that only those closest to him could hear the name that he rarely spoke aloud anymore. "Oh God, Margaret, what have you done? What are you trying to tell me?" The courtroom atmosphere had shifted completely. What had begun as a straightforward theft case was transforming into something that defied logical explanation. Judge Foster carefully took the necklace from Luke, her experienced hands steady despite her own confusion. She examined it under the courtroom's bright fluorescent lights, watching as the diamonds caught the harsh illumination and scattered rainbow patterns across the ceiling like scattered prayers. "Mr. Blake," she said slowly, her voice carrying the weight of judicial responsibility, "can you confirm that this is indeed the necklace in question? The one you reported stolen from your office?" Blake nodded slowly, unable to form words. His shaking hands reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he extracted a creased photograph that he handled with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. The image showed a beautiful woman with kind brown eyes and a radiant smile, wearing the exact same piece of jewelry that now lay in the judge's palm. "This was my wife's favorite necklace," he finally managed to say, his voice breaking like ice cracking on a frozen pond. "She wore it to our wedding 40 years ago. She wore it to every anniversary dinner, every important event in our lives together. When she was dying of cancer 2 years ago, it was the last thing she asked to hold." His voice grew stronger as he spoke, fueled by memories that were both painful and precious. "But, Your Honor, this doesn't make any sense. How could these children possibly have it? I locked it in my office safe after she died. I only take it out once each day to look at her photograph and remember." Sarah moved closer to her sons, her mind racing to understand what was happening. She knelt down between Jake and Luke, her voice gentle but urgent. "Boys, this is very important. Where did you find the pretty necklace? Can you tell Mommy?" Jake pointed toward the ceiling with his small finger and said something that sounded like "Sky Lady," his limited vocabulary struggling to express something beyond his years. Luke nodded enthusiastically, his eyes bright with the memory of something wonderful. "Nice Sky Lady. Pretty lady give Luke. Say give Emma, help Emma." The twins' words sent a chill through the courtroom that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Several people in the gallery began whispering among themselves, trying to make sense of what they were hearing. How could 2-year-olds have any contact with a woman who had been dead for 2 years? Judge Foster noticed something else troubling. Blake's face had progressed from grey to an alarming pale blue color. He was gripping his chest, and his breathing had become labored and irregular. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the cool courtroom temperature. "Mr. Blake, are you all right?" she asked with genuine concern, gesturing for the court medic who was always on standby during proceedings. "Do you need medical attention?" "The garden," Blake gasped suddenly, looking directly at the twins with a mixture of wonder and terror in his grey eyes. "You were in Margaret's memorial garden." "But that's impossible. The gate's been locked with a combination lock since she died 2 years ago. No one goes there anymore except me, and I haven't been there in months." Emma stepped forward, her natural curiosity overcoming her fear of the intimidating courtroom setting. "Mister, who's the Sky Lady?" "Jake and Luke talk about her sometimes when they're playing, but I don't understand what they mean. They say she smells like flowers and tells them stories." Blake's attorney, Richard Carrington, looked completely lost for the first time in his distinguished legal career. His carefully prepared case was crumbling before his eyes, replaced by something that belonged more in a fairy tale than a courtroom. "Your Honor, I don't know what kind of elaborate game this is, but surely we can't be expected to—" "This isn't a game," Blake interrupted, his voice gaining strength as understanding began to dawn in his eyes like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "These children, somehow they found Margaret's special hiding place. The place where she used to keep things that were important to her." He turned to face the twins directly, lowering himself to their level despite his expensive suit and the formal courtroom setting. His voice became gentle, almost reverent, as if he were speaking to angels rather than toddlers. "The lady in the garden. What did she look like? Can you tell me more about her?" Luke's face lit up with joy at the memory, his small hands gesturing excitedly. "Pretty lady, smell like roses, yellow hair like Emma. Say Emma, good girl, no trouble for Emma." "She has yellow hair like Emma's?" Blake asked, his voice filled with awe and disbelief. Margaret had indeed had blonde hair, though it had turned silver before her death. Both boys nodded enthusiastically, their identical expressions radiating the truth that only very young children can convey. "Sky Lady say, help Emma," Jake explained in his clearest speech yet, his words carrying conviction that was impossible to doubt. "She showed you where to find the necklace," Blake pressed, tears now flowing freely down his weathered cheeks. "Sky Lady take Luke's hand," Luke said solemnly. "Show pretty sparkly thing. Say bring to Emma." Blake closed his eyes tightly, and when he opened them, the transformation was remarkable. The angry, accusatory man who had entered the courtroom was gone, replaced by someone who looked as if he had just witnessed a miracle. "Your Honor, I need to withdraw all charges against Emma Wilson immediately. I owe this family not just an apology, but my deepest gratitude." Good. But as he spoke these words, the emotional weight of the entire morning, the fear, the confusion, the accusations, and now this mystical revelation that seemed to defy everything she understood about the world, proved too much for Emma's 7-year-old mind and body to handle. The stress hormones that had been coursing through her small system all morning finally overwhelmed her. The little girl's bright blue eyes rolled back, showing only white, and she crumpled to the courtroom floor in a dead faint, her small body hitting the marble with a sound that made everyone's heart stop. The courtroom erupted into complete chaos as Emma's unconscious form hit the cold marble floor. Sarah's scream pierced the air as she lunged forward, her maternal instincts overriding everything else. Judge Foster immediately banged her gavel and called for the court medic, her judicial composure cracking as she witnessed a child collapse in her courtroom. "Someone get a doctor immediately," Sarah cried, her voice echoing off the high ceiling as she gathered Emma's limp body into her arms. The little girl looked even smaller and more fragile lying there, her carefully braided blonde hair now disheveled, her pale face peaceful despite the turmoil surrounding her. Her blue sundress had twisted around her small frame, and one of her worn sneakers had come partially off. Harrison Blake, still kneeling from his conversation with the twins, moved with surprising agility for a man his age. He caught Emma's head before it could strike the unforgiving marble floor, his expensive suit jacket cushioning her fall. For a moment, the billionaire and the working mother knelt together, united in their concern for the unconscious child between them. Jake and Luke, not fully understanding what was happening, but sensing that something was terribly wrong, began to cry in the heartbreaking way that only very young children can. "Emma, wake up! Emma, wake up!" Luke pleaded, his small voice thick with tears, as he patted his sister's arm gently with his tiny hand. The court medic, a graying man named Dr. Rodriguez, who had seen everything in his 20 years of courthouse duty, arrived within 3 minutes that felt like hours. He knelt beside Emma, his experienced hands checking her pulse at her wrist and neck, lifting her eyelids to examine her pupils, and placing his stethoscope against her chest to listen to her breathing. "Her vitals are stable," he announced to the anxious crowd gathered around them, his voice carrying the calm authority of medical training. "Pulse is a little rapid but strong. Breathing is normal. This looks like a classic case of emotional and physical exhaustion combined with sensory overload. Has she eaten today?" Sarah shook her head, guilt washing over her face. "She was too nervous this morning. She could barely drink her orange juice. We've all been so scared about today that none of us have eaten properly in days." Dr. Rodriguez nodded understandingly. "Children her age can't process this level of stress the same way adults do. Her body essentially shut down to protect itself. She needs rest, fluids, and definitely a good meal." As Emma slowly began to regain consciousness, her eyelashes fluttering like butterfly wings against her pale cheeks, she found herself looking up into Harrison Blake's worried grey eyes. The transformation in his face was remarkable. Where there had been cold accusation and anger just an hour earlier, now there was genuine concern and something that looked remarkably like grandfatherly affection. "I'm so sorry, little one," he whispered to her as she struggled to focus on his face. "I was wrong about you. So terribly, completely wrong. Can you ever forgive a foolish old man?" Emma sat up slowly with her mother's help, still groggy but alert enough to be confused by the change in Mr. Blake's demeanor. "Are you still mad at me?" she asked in a small voice, her words slightly slurred from her fainting spell. "Mad at you?" Blake's voice cracked with emotion. "Oh, sweetheart, I should never have been mad at you in the first place. You're innocent, completely innocent, and I should have seen that from the beginning." Judge Foster stepped forward, her black robes rustling as she moved. "Given the extraordinary circumstances that have come to light, I am officially dismissing all charges against Emma Wilson. The case is closed, and her record will be completely cleared." The relief in the courtroom was palpable, but Blake wasn't finished. As Emma sat up fully, supported by her mother's arms and surrounded by her protective brothers, he made an announcement that stunned everyone present. "Your Honor, I want to do more than just apologize," Blake said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I want to establish a college fund for Emma Wilson, full tuition, room and board, whatever she needs to pursue any education she desires. And Mrs. Wilson, I'm offering you a position at Blake Industries, not as a janitor, but as the director of our new Family Support Services Department. You'll help other families navigate crises with a salary that will allow you to give your children the life they deserve." Sarah stared at him in complete disbelief, her mouth opening and closing without sound. "Mr. Blake, I don't understand. After everything that's happened, why would you do this for us?" Blake looked at the twins, who were now sitting quietly beside their sister, still holding hands, as if they were anchored to each other. "Because these remarkable children have given me something I thought I'd lost forever when Margaret died. Hope. They've shown me that love doesn't end with death, and that sometimes the most important truths come from the most unexpected messengers." He paused, pulling out his phone to show them a photograph of a beautiful garden filled with roses in full bloom. "This is Margaret's memorial garden behind our house. I had it created after she passed away, and it's been locked since her funeral. The combination to that lock is our wedding anniversary, a date that only Margaret and I knew. The necklace was hidden in a secret compartment inside her favorite rosebush, a hiding spot we created together 40 years ago." Emma looked at her brothers with newfound respect and wonder. "Jake and Luke really are special," she declared, with the serious conviction that only children possess, making everyone in the courtroom smile for the first time that day. "No, sweetheart," Blake said gently, his voice filled with warmth that had been absent for 2 years. "They're not just special, they're miraculous. They helped an old man remember what Margaret always tried to teach me, that goodness exists in this world, especially in the hearts of children, and that love is the only thing that really matters." But as the Wilson family prepared to leave the courthouse together, their lives forever changed by this extraordinary day. None of them noticed the subtle signs that something beyond the physical world had orchestrated these events. The faint scent of roses that lingered in the air despite the building's sterile ventilation system. The warm golden light that seemed to shimmer around the twins for just a moment, visible only to those who looked with their hearts rather than their eyes. And the gentle breeze that somehow moved through the closed courtroom, carrying with it a sense of peace and completion. Margaret Blake's spirit had finally found the peace she had sought, knowing that her husband had rediscovered his capacity for compassion and that justice had prevailed through the innocent voices of 2 children who saw the 3 months later, on a crisp December morning. Emma Wilson stood in the marble lobby of Blake Industries, wearing a brand-new red velvet dress that actually fit her perfectly. Her blonde hair was styled in neat pigtails with matching red ribbons, and she clutched a handwritten invitation in her small hands. The building that had once represented terror and accusations now felt like a second home, filled with friendly faces who knew her story. "Are you ready for this, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, smoothing down her own new outfit, a professional navy blue suit that Harrison Blake had insisted on buying for her new position. In 3 months, Sarah's entire life had transformed. She now managed the Family Support Services Department, helping other families navigate legal and financial crises. For the first time in years, she felt like she was making a real difference. The twins, now closer to their 3rd birthday, toddled beside them wearing matching little suits. Jake carried a small wrapped present, while Luke clutched a drawing he had made that morning, a colourful crayon masterpiece that supposedly depicted the Sky Lady surrounded by roses. "Mr. Blake!" Emma called out as she spotted the familiar silver-haired figure emerging from the elevator. Harrison Blake looked remarkable for his 62 years. His face carrying a lightness and warmth that hadn't been there during those dark courthouse days. He had gained weight back after months of barely eating, and his grey eyes now sparkled with genuine joy. "Emma, my dear." Blake knelt down to hug her, something that still amazed everyone who knew him. The ruthless businessman who had once been feared throughout the city now spent his lunch hours reading stories to a 7-year-old girl and teaching 2-year-old twins to say please and thank you. Today was special, the dedication ceremony for Margaret Blake Memorial Garden, which Blake had decided to open to the public as a healing space for families in crisis. The garden would be staffed by counselors and social workers, providing a peaceful environment where parents and children could find support during difficult times. "Is the Sky Lady gonna be there?" Luke asked with his improving vocabulary, looking up at Blake with those impossibly blue eyes that always seemed to see more than they should. Blake's expression grew thoughtful, the way it always did when the twins mentioned Margaret. "I think she's always there, Luke." Maybe not in a way we can see, but in all the good things that happen because of the love she shared. Emma tugged on Blake's sleeve, her face serious with 7-year-old importance. Mr. Blake, I wrote something for today. Mrs. Patterson at school helped me with the big words. Do you want to hear it? I would be honored to hear it, Emma. She pulled out a folded piece of paper covered in her careful handwriting. It's about how sometimes bad things happen, but then good things can come from them if people learn to see differently. Like how you thought I was bad, but then you learned I was good, and now we're friends. Blake felt tears prick his eyes as he listened to the simple wisdom that had taken him 62 years to understand. Children, he had learned, possessed a clarity about right and wrong that adults often lost in their complicated world of expectations and prejudices. The dedication ceremony was attended by dozens of families who had been helped by the new Family Support Services Department. There were single mothers who had found legal aid, children who'd been placed in better homes, and elderly people who had been connected with resources they desperately needed. As Blake gave his speech about second chances and the power of children to change hearts, Emma noticed something that made her smile. In the crowd of adults listening intently, she could swear she saw a shimmer of golden light near the rose garden's entrance. And for just a moment, the scent of roses seemed stronger than it should have been in December. But more importantly, she saw something else. Her mother's face glowing with pride and purpose, her little brothers holding hands and babbling happily to each other, and Mr. Blake looking like a man who had found his way home after being lost for a very long time. The truth, Emma was learning, wasn't just about proving innocence. Sometimes it was about proving that people could change, that love could heal old wounds, and that miracles often came in the smallest, most unexpected packages. The spring sunshine streamed through the windows of Emma's new bedroom as she sat at her child-sized desk, carefully writing in a journal that had become her most treasured possession. 6 months after the courthouse incident, life had settled into a rhythm that felt almost magical compared to their previous struggles. The small apartment that Sarah could now afford in a safe neighborhood felt like a palace to Emma. "Dear Journal," Emma wrote in her improving handwriting, "today Jake said a whole sentence. He said, 'Emma is my best big sister.' Luke clapped and said it too. Mommy cried happy tears." The twins had indeed been developing their language skills remarkably quickly, often surprising everyone with their insight and emotional intelligence. Their daycare teachers frequently commented on how well they communicated with other children and seemed to have an unusual ability to comfort upset classmates. Emma heard laughter from the kitchen and set down her pencil to investigate. She found Sarah teaching the twins how to make cookies for Harrison Blake's upcoming birthday. Flour dusted every surface, and both boys were covered head to toe in the white powder, looking like tiny ghosts with mischievous grins. "Mommy, they're making a mess!" Emma giggled, but she immediately rolled up her sleeves to help. This was another change in their lives. They had time for things like baking cookies and family games, luxuries that had been impossible when Sarah worked 3 jobs just to pay rent. "Mr. Blake is going to love these cookies," Sarah said, ruffling Emma's hair with a flour-dusted hand. "He told me yesterday that he's never had homemade cookies from children before. Can you believe that? 63 years old and he's never experienced something so simple and wonderful." The phone rang, interrupting their baking session. Sarah answered with her usual cheerful greeting, but her expression quickly changed to one of concern. Emma watched her mother's face carefully, having learned to read the subtle signs that indicated adult problems. "Yes, I understand. We'll be there tomorrow morning," Sarah said before hanging up. She turned to the children with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "That was Mr. Blake. He has something very important to tell us, and he wants us to come to his house tomorrow." "His big house?" Emma asked, remembering the mansion they had visited once for a company picnic. The Blake estate was like something from a fairy tale, with its sprawling gardens and rooms bigger than their entire old apartment. Yes, sweetheart. He said it's good news, but he wants to tell us in person. That evening, as Sarah tucked the children into their beds, Emma couldn't shake a feeling that something significant was about to happen. The twins seemed to sense it too, whispering to each other in their secret twin language that no one else could understand. "Mommy," Emma said sleepily, "do you think the Sky Lady is still helping us?" Sarah paused in her bedtime routine, considering the question seriously. Over the past months she had come to believe that something beyond coincidence had orchestrated their transformation from desperation to hope. Too many good things had happened, too many doors had opened at exactly the right moments. "I think," Sarah said carefully, "that when people love each other very much, that love doesn't just disappear. Maybe it finds ways to keep helping and protecting the people left behind." Emma nodded, satisfied with this explanation. As she drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of rose gardens and gentle voices telling her that tomorrow would bring changes that would secure their family's future in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But even in her dreams, Emma couldn't have anticipated what Harrison Blake was planning to tell them. His announcement would not only shock the Wilson family, but would also make headlines across the city, demonstrating once again that redemption often comes in forms that exceed our wildest expectations. The Blake mansion stood majestically against the morning sky, its limestone facade gleaming in the sunlight as the Wilson family approached the imposing front entrance. Emma held her mother's hand tightly, while Jake and Luke flanked them on either side, their eyes wide with wonder at the sheer scale of the building they were about to enter. Harrison Blake met them at the door personally, which was unusual given that he employed a full household staff. His grey eyes sparkled with barely contained excitement, and he moved with an energy that Emma had never seen in him before. He wore a casual sweater instead of his usual business suit, making him appear more grandfatherly than corporate. "Welcome, my dear friends," he said warmly, ushering them into the grand foyer with its crystal chandelier and marble staircase. "I hope you're all hungry. Mrs. Henderson has prepared quite a feast for us." Emma marveled at the oil paintings lining the walls and the fresh flower arrangements that filled the air with the scent of roses. But what struck her most was how different the atmosphere felt from her first visit. Then the mansion had seemed cold and intimidating. Now it felt warm and welcoming, and they were led to a sunny breakfast room overlooking Margaret's memorial garden. Emma could see couples walking the winding paths, children playing on the playground equipment, and elderly visitors sitting on benches surrounded by blooming flowers. "Before we eat," Blake said, his voice carrying a tremor of emotion, "I have something very important to discuss with all of you. Sarah, Emma, boys, you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. When Margaret died, I thought my capacity for love and joy had died with her. But you've shown me that the heart has an unlimited ability to expand." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick legal document bound in blue ribbon. Emma noticed that his hands were shaking slightly, the way they had in the courtroom that day when everything changed. "I've been working with my lawyers for several months now to finalize something very special. Sarah, you've become like a daughter to me. Emma, you're the granddaughter I never had. And Jake and Luke." He looked at the twins with wonder. "Well, they've shown me that miracles really do exist in this world." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as Blake continued. "I want to officially adopt all of you into my family, not just emotionally, but legally. I want you to be Wilson Blakes if you'll have me as your grandfather." The silence that followed was complete. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears that sparkled like diamonds in the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. "Mr. Blake," Sarah whispered, "I don't know what to say. That's incredibly generous. But we couldn't ask you to—" "You're not asking," Blake interrupted gently. "I'm begging. These past months have been the happiest I've experienced since Margaret's death. Emma's laughter echoing through my offices, the twins' innocent questions that make me see the world through fresh eyes. Your friendship and wisdom, Sarah. You've all given me a reason to look forward to each new day." Emma stood up from her chair, walked around the table, and climbed onto Blake's lap with the unself-conscious affection that only children possess. "Does that mean you'd really be our grandpa?" she asked, her blue eyes searching his face for the truth. "If you'll have me, sweetheart. It means you'll never have to worry about college or your future. It means this house will always be your home whenever you want it to be." Luke suddenly stood up and walked to Blake. "Grandpa Blake," he said clearly, testing out the words. Then he smiled the radiant smile that could melt anyone's heart. "Grandpa Blake, good." Jake immediately joined his brother. "Grandpa Blake! Grandpa Blake!" Sarah was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the magnitude of Blake's offer. "Harrison, I don't know how to thank you. This is beyond anything I ever dreamed was possible." "Then say yes," Blake said simply. "Say you'll let me be the grandfather these remarkable children deserve." As Emma hugged her soon-to-be grandfather, she caught sight of something in the garden that made her smile. For just a moment, she could have sworn she saw a woman with blonde hair standing among the roses, her face radiant with approval and joy. The adoption ceremony took place on a golden October afternoon, in the same courthouse where Emma's nightmare had begun nearly a year earlier. But this time, courtroom 3B was filled with joy instead of fear, decorated with flowers from Margaret's memorial garden and packed with friends and colleagues. Judge Margaret Foster, who had insisted on presiding over the proceedings, smiled warmly as she looked down at the transformed family standing before her bench. Emma wore a beautiful white dress, while Jake and Luke sported matching navy suits, complete with tiny bow ties they kept trying to untie. "This is certainly a more pleasant proceeding than the last time I saw this family in my courtroom," Judge Foster remarked, earning chuckles from the packed gallery. "It's remarkable how truth has a way of not just setting us free, but of creating bonds that are stronger than blood." Harrison Blake stood with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks as he listened to the judge read the adoption decree. At 63, he was gaining an instant family that would challenge him, love him, and keep him young in ways he had never imagined possible. "Emma," Judge Foster said gently, "do you understand what this ceremony means?" Emma stepped forward, her confidence a stark contrast to the terrified little girl who had stood in this same spot 11 months earlier. "It means Mr. Blake is going to be our real grandpa forever, and we're going to be his real family forever, and nobody can ever take that away from us. And how do you feel about that?" Emma's face lit up with pure joy. "I feel like the luckiest girl in the whole world, and I think the Sky Lady is happy too." Luke raised his small hand. "Judge Lady, Grandpa Blake teaches us numbers and letters every day. He's the best grandpa ever." Jake nodded enthusiastically. "And he lets us eat cookies for breakfast sometimes when Mommy isn't looking?" The courtroom erupted in laughter, and even Sarah couldn't help but grin at this revelation about her soon-to-be father-in-law's permissive grandparenting style. "Harrison Blake," Judge Foster continued, "do you promise to love and protect these children as if they were your own blood?" "Your Honor," Blake replied, his voice strong and clear, "I promise to love them even more than that. Emma saved my life by showing me that innocence and goodness still exist in this world. Jake and Luke reminded me that miracles happen every single day if we're open to seeing them. And Sarah has become the daughter I never had, but always wished for." As Judge Foster raised her gavel to make the adoption official, something extraordinary happened. A gentle breeze somehow moved through the closed courtroom, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of roses. Emma felt warm hands briefly touch her shoulders, and when she looked around, she saw that the twins were smiling and waving at something only they could see. By the power vested in me by the state of Illinois, Judge Foster declared, I hereby declare this adoption final and binding. You are now officially the Wilson Blake family. The gavel came down with a decisive bang, and the courtroom exploded in applause and cheers. Emma found herself swept up in hugs from what felt like dozens of people. But the moment that meant the most was when Harrison Blake knelt down and whispered in her ear, "Thank you, Emma. Thank you for seeing the good in me when I couldn't see it in myself. Thank you for being the best grandpa ever," Emma whispered back, "and for believing me when nobody else would." But as the celebration moved to the courthouse steps for photographs, Blake pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation that would add one final miraculous chapter to their already incredible story. "Sarah," he said quietly, "there's one more thing. Something I've been working on that I wanted to save as a surprise." He handed her another legal document sealed with red wax. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it and see." Sarah broke the seal and unfolded the papers, her eyes widening as she read. Then she looked up at Blake with complete shock. "Harrison, this can't be real." "And it's very real," Blake smiled, "and it's just the beginning." The document in Sarah's hands was a deed to the Blake mansion and its 50-acre estate, including Margaret's memorial garden. But even more shocking was the attached trust fund worth $50 million, established specifically for the Wilson Blake family's future and their charitable work. "Harrison," Sarah gasped, "I can't accept this. It's too much. The house alone is worth millions." Blake took her hands gently. "Sarah, my dear daughter, you still don't understand. My life's work isn't money or property. It's the love and purpose you and your children have given me. Without you, none of this has any meaning." Emma, who had been eavesdropping, tugged on Blake's sleeve. "Grandpa, does this mean we get to live in the big house with all the pretty rooms?" "If you want to, sweetheart. The house has been empty and lonely for too long. It needs children's laughter and love to make it feel like a real home again." The twins ran to Blake with their arms outstretched. Luke climbed onto his lap, while Jake leaned against his shoulder, both boys sensing that something important was happening. "But there's more," Blake continued. "The trust fund comes with a responsibility. I want you to expand the Family Support Services program nationwide. Help families who are facing the same struggles you once faced. Make sure no child ever has to stand in a courtroom without proper legal representation." "You want us to create a national organization?" Sarah asked, her mind reeling. "I want us to create something that will outlast all of us, something that honors Margaret's memory and the miracle of what happened when 4 strangers became a family. The Margaret Blake Foundation for Family Justice." Over the following weeks, as the Wilson Blake family settled into their new life at the mansion, Emma began to understand the full magnitude of the changes. Her bedroom was larger than their entire old apartment, with built-in bookshelves that Blake had filled with books. The twins shared a playroom that looked like a toy store had exploded. But the most magical part of their new home was Margaret's memorial garden, where Emma often found herself talking to the roses. The twins seemed especially drawn to a particular corner where Margaret's favorite yellow roses bloomed even out of season. "Sometimes I think I can hear her laughing," Emma confided to her mother one evening as they walked through the garden, "especially when Jake and Luke are being silly." Sarah had learned not to dismiss such statements. Too many inexplicable things had happened for her to discount the possibility that Margaret's spirit continued to watch over their family. That night, as Sarah tucked Emma into her canopy bed, Emma made an observation that stopped her mother in her tracks. "Mommy, do you think all this happened because I was accused of stealing that necklace?" "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I mean, if that scary day in court hadn't happened, we never would have met Grandpa Blake. We'd still be living in the tiny apartment, and you'd still be working all the time." The wisdom of children never ceased to amaze Sarah. Emma had identified something the adults were still struggling to understand, that sometimes our worst moments lead directly to our best ones. You might be right, Emma. Maybe the Sky Lady knew exactly what she was doing. I think she did, Emma said drowsily. I think she wanted to make sure we all found each other, because families aren't just people who are born together. Sometimes they're people who choose to love each other. As Emma drifted off to sleep, Sarah realized that her daughter had articulated the most profound truth of all. Love, not blood, creates the strongest families. 5 years after that fateful day in the courthouse, Emma Wilson Blake stood at the podium of the Chicago Convention Center, addressing an audience of 3,000 people at the annual Margaret Blake Foundation Conference. At 13, she had grown into a confident young woman with her mother's kind eyes and her grandfather's determination. When I was 8 years old, Emma began, I was accused of a crime I didn't commit. I stood in a courtroom without a lawyer, terrified and alone, facing a man who wanted to send me to juvenile detention for something I had never done. The audience listened with rapt attention. Emma's story had become legendary in legal circles, but hearing it directly from her always carried special power. But that terrifying day became the most important day of my life, because it taught me that truth has a way of revealing itself, even when everything seems hopeless. And sometimes the people who seem like our enemies are actually destined to become our greatest allies. In the front row, Harrison Blake watched his granddaughter with tears of pride. At 68, he remained active as chairman of the foundation. Jake and Luke, now 7 years old, sat on either side of him, trying their best to sit still during Emma's important speech. Sarah, now 33, and the foundation's executive director, watched from the wings. The organization she led employed over 200 people across 15 states, providing free legal representation to families in crisis. They had helped thousands of children avoid Emma's experience. The Margaret Blake Foundation exists because my grandfather learned something that changed both our lives, Emma continued. He learned that love is stronger than pride, that forgiveness is more powerful than anger, and that children often see truths that adults miss. But most importantly, he learned that families aren't just created by blood, they're created by choice and commitment. As Emma spoke about the Foundation's work, neither she nor anyone else noticed the subtle signs that had become familiar to the Wilson Blake family over the years. The faint scent of roses that somehow permeated the convention center. The warm golden light that seemed to shimmer around Jake and Luke, who still occasionally mentioned their conversations with the Sky Lady. In closing, Emma said, I want to thank the woman who started all of this, even though she never lived to see it. Margaret Blake believed that love doesn't end with death. It transforms and continues to work miracles in the lives of those left behind. She believed that every child deserves protection, every family deserves justice, and every person deserves a second chance. The applause was thunderous as Emma concluded her speech, but the moment that mattered most came when she stepped into her grandfather's arms. Harrison Blake held her tightly, this remarkable young woman who had saved his life by showing him the power of innocence. I'm so proud of you, he whispered, and I know Margaret would be proud too. I can feel her sometimes, Emma whispered back, especially when we're all together. She's happy, Grandpa. She's happy that we found each other. Later that evening, as the Wilson Blake family gathered in Margaret's memorial garden, they reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them together. The garden had become a pilgrimage site for families seeking hope, but it remained a private sanctuary where their unusual family could connect with the love that had made their miracle possible. Jake and Luke still maintained their special connection to the garden. As they played among the roses in the fading light, Emma heard Luke talking to someone only he could see. Thank you, Sky Lady, he said seriously. Thank you for helping us find our family. Emma smiled, no longer surprised by her brother's ongoing relationship with their supernatural benefactor. She had learned that some truths transcend explanation, and some love transcends death itself. As the family prepared to return to the house, Emma felt a gentle hand touch her shoulder and heard a voice that seemed to come from the roses themselves. "Well done, little one. Well done." The truth had indeed set them all free, free to love, free to forgive, free to build something beautiful from the ashes of misunderstanding and fear. Their story had become a testament to the transformative power of love, proof that sometimes our darkest moments are doorways to our brightest futures, and evidence that truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to bloom.